All right, let's get right into it. You need to forget pretty much everything you think you know about global politics, because what we're talking about today, this isn't about policy. It's about a grudge. We are diving deep into the absolutely wild story of how one diplomatic snub spiraled into a full-blown economic war between two superpowers. And it's threatening to light a match to one of the most important alliances on the entire planet. It all starts with this number, 50%. Just try to imagine that for a second. Everything you buy from India, I'm talking clothes, spices, maybe even parts in your phone or your car, all of it suddenly costing 50% more. Just overnight. That's the economic bomb that the Trump administration dropped. And let's be clear, this wasn't just some tariff. No, this was a declaration of war. It was one of the biggest economic punches the U.S. has ever thrown, especially at a major ally. And you know, the world's top analysts, they basically lost their minds. This guy, Michael Kogelman, who watches the stuff for a living, he didn't just call it a disagreement or a dispute. No, he called it the single worst crisis between the U.S. and India in 20 years. He was pretty much screaming from the rooftops, "Hey people, this is not a drill."
Okay, so a sudden trade war. How did we get here? That's the billion-dollar question, right? I mean, just months before this, the US and India were practically best friends. They were supposed to be the dynamic duo, keeping China in check. And then, boom, August 2025 hits, and suddenly they're in an all-out trade war. To really get it, you gotta look at what was simmering right below the surface.
And this all happened so fast, it would make your head spin. On August 1st, they drop a 25% tariff. That's a huge gut punch right there. But they weren't finished, oh no. Just a few weeks later, they came back and slammed them with another 25%. The official reason they gave? That India was buying Russian oil. But as we're about to see, the real reason, well, that was a whole lot more personal. So the White House, they put out this official statement. It says, we're penalizing India for dealing with Russia. But India's response was basically, are you kidding me right now? They called the whole thing a complete sham. And they pointed out, and you got to listen to this because this is the killer part, that the US and Europe were still trading with Russia themselves. India's response was essentially a giant flashing neon sign that just said, hypocrisy. Right? So that's the what of the situation. Now we get to the why. Because these tariffs, they didn't just appear out of thin air. Nope. They were the final explosion after months of this diplomatic drama that honestly played out like a season of some crazy reality TV show. This is where the story gets really interesting. And you can literally watch the fuse being lit. First, back in May, Trump tries to take a big victory lap for a ceasefire he had nothing to do with. India publicly shuts him down. That's snub number one. Then, in June, Prime Minister Modi gets a last-minute dinner invite and basically says, nah, sorry, I'm busy. That's snub number two. And apparently, for this White House, 2 snubs was all it took to justify launching an economic war. And look, people watching this whole thing unfold weren't buying the official story for 1 second. Commentators like Rick Sanchez, they just came right out and said it plain as day. This wasn't policy. This was a personal vendetta. This was a trade war that got started over hurt feelings. So you have a decision made out of, what, personal pique? And it starts this massive fire. But here's the thing. This fire wasn't just burning in Washington or New Delhi. It sent economic shockwaves across the entire globe. And the damage was immediate. And it was brutal. This chart right here, it basically shows India getting shoved to the very back of the line. Their effective tax rate to sell products to the US shot all the way up to 35%. You know who was happy about that? All their competitors in the region. Suddenly, they were way, way cheaper. The US had basically just put a giant on-sale sign on every country in Asia except for India. And inside India, it was chaos. Just try to imagine 70% of your business with your biggest customer just vanishing overnight. That's what was on the table. Companies that were planning on moving to India slammed on the brakes. Entire industries, I'm talking jewelry, textiles, things that employ millions of regular people, were suddenly facing total ruin. And to top it all off, their currency, the rupee, just went into an absolute nosedive. But even with their economy getting hammered on the ropes, India refused to back down. Their message was crystal clear. We will not be bullied. The commerce minister pretty much drew a line in the sand and said they would rather go out and find new friends than bow down to the United States. And you know, it wasn't just India that was furious. Back in the US, the political world just exploded. You had people on all sides of the aisle looking at this move and thinking, have you guys lost your minds? I mean, you had major political players like Nikki Haley just screaming from the rooftops that this was an epic strategic blunder. Her point was really simple. We have spent 25 years building up India as our key ally against China, and you just took out our best player's knee with a crowbar. This is a strategic disaster.
And for once, Congress actually seemed to agree on something. Democrats came out swinging, saying this policy was, well, just plain dumb. They argued it was going to make things more expensive for regular Americans at home, while at the same time sabotaging a critical alliance abroad. It was a lose-lose. There was no upside.
And it wasn't just the opposition. Even guys who used to be on the inside, people like John Bolton, they were just baffled. He called the whole thing erratic, basically asking out loud, what is the game plan here? Why are we picking a massive fight with India and letting everybody else off the hook?
And meanwhile, on the streets in India, the anger was just boiling over. For them, this wasn't just some news story they'd read about. No, this was a direct insult. In places like Punjab, farmers literally took to the streets, they were burning effigies, and they were calling out what they saw as total, blatant hypocrisy from the West. Which brings us to right now. With both sides just locked in this incredibly high-stakes staring contest, you've got negotiators desperately trying to defuse this bomb, because if they can't, the future of this critical alliance, and maybe the entire balance of power in Asia, is completely on the line.
And if you look at what's happening at the negotiating table, you can see exactly why they're stuck. The U.S. wants India to throw open its doors to American farmers. But for India, that is a total non-starter. They've got millions of their own farmers to protect. So it's this classic standoff. America won't budge on farm goods, and India won't even really talk until those monster tariffs are gone.
And you can just hear the frustration in the voice of the lead U.S. negotiator. He called India a very difficult nut to crack, but then he immediately admitted that their last offer was the best we've ever received. It's kind of like saying, man, I hate fighting with you, but you are really good at it. And that one little quote tells you everything you need to know about how desperate both sides are to find a way out of this mess. So after all this, what's the big takeaway from this completely insane saga? Is this just a crazy blip, a relationship crisis that can be patched up over time? Or have we just entered a dangerous new era, a new normal, where a personal grudge can unravel decades of diplomacy and put the entire global economy at risk? The answer to that question? Well, that's going to define the world we all live in for the next 20 years.